It's Thursday, June 19th, and it's 4:20 somewhere in the world. I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville. Produced and distributed by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C., this is your NORML Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Welcome to the most popular podcast regarding marijuana in all of America and all the world, featuring interviews with scientists, politicians, doctors, prohibition policy activists, regular cannabis consumers, musicians, and NORML staff and NORML's board of directors, along with music and comedy no other podcast can offer. You can always find out more about our show at our website, stash.normal.org, and continue the education and conversation on our blog as well. We're ending marijuana prohibition with education, one listener at a time. The podcasting and blogging technology for the NORML Daily Audio Stash is provided by Red Aphid Interactive Media. For your professional web design needs, visit redaphid.com. Welcome to the Stash, everyone, today, and happy Juneteenth. Some of you may not know what Juneteenth is, but it is the oldest nationally celebrated commemoration of ending slavery in the United States. Originally began in Galveston, Texas in 1865, an observance of June 19th as African American Emancipation Day. So happy Juneteenth to everyone out there, and check out the website at juneteenth.com if you'd like to learn more about the Juneteenth celebrations. Now here at the Stash, we're continuing to see the fallout from the not your father's pot, super pot potency scare that the drug czars out there trying to push. And again, we're getting a lot of responses back on this in the media. Today it got mentioned by Andrew Sullivan, a conservative blogger, pretty prominent conservative political blogger, and Reason Magazine also has a post up on the perils of potent pot. Check out the links to those at our Stash blog at stash.normal.org. Also for today, I've got some more highlights from the Aspen Legal Conference that took place 2 weekends ago in Aspen, Colorado. The president-elect of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, John Wesley Hall, gave a presentation on Saturday on roadside traffic stops and search and seizure, and good stuff that lawyers and citizens need to know about what's legal and what's not legal in a roadside traffic stop. We'll give that to you as a two-parter, so the first part and then the musical break and then the second part. Then speaking of the musical break, we're going to go international with today's musical break featuring Hannabis, a Japanese rapper and a Shingon Buddhist priest. All right, people, let's get this party started. Grab yourself some East Coast sour diesel, sit back and relax, because now it's time for your NORML Daily Audio Stash. Now it's time to take a look at the latest stories about marijuana from news organizations across America and around the world in our NORML Daily Audio Stash, Hemp Headlines. New York State Representative Kerwin wants to ban big mean dogs for drug offenders. Representative Kerwin has submitted Bill A3539, an act to amend the penal law in relation to restricting ownership of vicious dogs. The purpose of the bill is to prohibit those convicted of a felony crime relating to selling or possessing a controlled substance from owning or possessing a vicious dog. A vicious dog is defined as one that weighs more than 20 pounds and has either been trained to physically attack persons or has exhibited a vicious disposition or propensity. The penal law prohibits convicted felons from possessing guns, knives, and other dangerous instrumentalities. Since attack dogs are commonly used by drug dealers in the place of guns in the pursuit of their drug trade, the possession of these live weapons in place of a gun should also be criminalized. In addition, the police would be protected when arresting recidivist drug dealers. The law would also protect the general public from these dangerous animals. Hey, you know what else we ought to do? We ought to make it a Class A misdemeanor for these guys to take any martial arts classes or lift weights. Fist fights are another way these drug dealers pursue their drug trade, right? Police would be protected too, since they could easily arrest such 98-pound weaklings. This is yet another stupid salvo in the war on drugs. This is obviously aimed at pit bulls and Rottweilers, and not so subtly at inner-city minorities who tend to own those dogs mainly for security and protection in the under-policed areas of poverty in which they live. So now the ex-con who had the misfortune to be caught growing a marijuana garden, who can't protect himself in his home with any sort of weapon, now can't even have a trusty guard dog? I guess they'll have to get a nice poisonous snake for a pet. They're still legal, right? Is marijuana possession legal in Canada? Clifford Long's constitutional saga began in September 2005 when he was a passenger in a car stopped by police for a seatbelt infraction. The officers conducted a search, allegedly found $40 worth of marijuana, and Long joined the ranks of more than 40,000 people still charged each year across Canada for simple possession of cannabis. Long was acquitted in July 2007 when Provincial Court Justice Howard Borenstein accepted an argument by Long's lawyer that Canada's marijuana possession laws were unconstitutional because of flaws in the medical marijuana regulations. Earlier this year, a federal court of Canada judge also found the medical marijuana regulations to be unconstitutional, a decision that is under appeal. Now that got me to Googling because I couldn't figure out how a medical marijuana regulation would affect a non-medical possession case. Now, if I'm reading this correctly, and I may not be because I'm no lawyer, and certainly even less familiar with Canadian law, but the way I see it, it breaks down like this. There's a law against possessing marijuana. However, you have a right to use medical marijuana. So how do you know that the marijuana possessor isn't using it medically? The government said it will supply the marijuana to the medical users. That way, anyone possessing non-government marijuana will be a criminal. But hold on. Government only made that a policy. There's no law that says they have to supply medical marijuana. If there's no law requiring government to supply medical marijuana, then government's not bound to supply medical marijuana. And if government's not bound to supply medical marijuana, then medical users have no choice but to obtain it illegally. Thus, since there's no legal way for medical users to assert their right, the law preventing them from doing so is null and void. Hope I got that right. Even though the decision in the Long case isn't binding upon Canadian law, provincial judges in Ontario have stopped accepting guilty pleas in minor marijuana possession cases. The government in Ottawa wants to get this resolved by appealing the case, but there's some strange twists in that tale as well. The federal government quickly filed an appeal of Borenstein's ruling last summer, but Long's former lawyer is under administrative suspension by the body that regulates the profession in Ontario. Meanwhile, his current lawyer, retained to represent him on the charges that led to him being in custody, isn't returning his calls. Another lawyer from that firm arrived in court eventually to say she knew little about the case, but would be willing to represent Long if he receives legal aid. Judge Frank instructed Long to take more steps to try to get funding, but pointed out Long may have to represent himself in this case. And there's the ultimate irony, that the fate of Canada's pot possession laws may rest on the legal self-defense of one heavily tattooed 30-year-old Canadian man with no professional legal knowledge or experience. Puerto Rican officials push to legalize pot, no health problem required. San Juan, Puerto Rico. A former health secretary and an ex-university president want to legalize marijuana in Puerto Rico, saying it will reduce a burgeoning prison population and prevent young adults from being exposed to violent criminals. Under the plan, marijuana would be taxed as liquor and tobacco are now, with proceeds going toward drug treatment programs, said former Health Secretary Enrique Vázquez Quintana. The proposal, also supported by other former public officials and a medical doctor, calls for stricter penalties against drug traffickers and comes as the U.S. Caribbean Territory prepares to launch drug treatment programs to wean addicts from crack, heroin, and other substances. Jose Manuel Saldana, former president of the University of Puerto Rico, said, quote, "The fight against drugs, using punishment, has not worked. This is a social reality." End quote. People should not go to jail for smoking pot, he said. Too many young adults become criminals in prison and also risk contracting hepatitis and AIDS while there, Saldana and Vasquez said. The Puerto Rican proposal is similar to the Oregon Cannabis Tax Act that will be gathering signatures in July for the 2010 ballot. More public policymakers are realizing there's a substantial untaxed revenue source in consumer cannabis that would generate $10 to $14 billion in income and savings if it were taxed and regulated like alcohol.
Marijuana is an addictive drug which produces in its users insanity, criminality, and death.
Marijuana is the most violence-causing drug in the history of mankind.
If the hideous monster Frankenstein came face to face with the monster of marijuana, he would drop dead from fright.
Reefer Madness.
New CASA report finds marijuana potency up 175%. Medical diagnoses, treatment admissions, ER findings for teen marijuana use up sharply. New York, New York.
Despite reported declines in teen marijuana use, in 2007 almost 11 million teens report having used marijuana. For those using the drug, 4 alarming trends are of grave concern for parents and teens, according to Non-Medical Marijuana 3, Rite of Passage or Russian Roulette, a new report by the National Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse, or CASA, at Columbia University. From 1992 through 2006, there was a 175% jump in the potency of marijuana, from 3.2% to 8.8% THC concentration in seized samples.
The potency zombie just will not die. Here it is. You can go read the report yourself, but on page 14, it's interesting to note that the percentage of domestic seizures compared to non-domestic seizures varies from 20.9% of the total to 45.5% of the overall sample when they're considering the average. And as we learned from the Drug Czar's blog, domestic means unharvested marijuana not ready for consumption. Why would you average in the domestic marijuana when the point is to claim that the marijuana being consumed by teens today is so much more potent? And are the kids today really getting a hold of more potent ganja? A look at page 6 shows us that between December 16, 2007 and March 15, 2008, their latest quarter, they analyzed 1,290 samples. Of that, 3.25% of it was hash or hash oil, the really potent stuff. So 96.75% of what's seized lately is cannabis. Now a look at page 7 shows that of the cannabis that was seized, 48% was sinsemilla buds and 21% was marijuana buds, which clock in at an average THC of 10.7% and 7.16% respectively. So 31% of what's out there is the low-grade shake and ditchweed and brickweed, which is the low-cost stuff that most cash-strapped youngsters would be economically drawn toward. However, the variance in potency is immense, from lows of 0.6% and 1.4% to highs of 28.19% and 37.2%. And how much of the high-potency buds are based on seizures the DEA recorded from busting California medical dispensaries or the medicine grown for those dispensaries? Now, I know people's eyes glass over when numbers start flying around, so it can be difficult to understand why the variance and the average matter. Here's an example to illustrate. Suppose you lined up 5 marijuana buds from a street dealer, and all 5 register at 2.5% THC. Then you throw in 5 medical buds from a dispensary registering at 17.5% THC. Now, the kids are going to be unlikely to get any of the medical buds, but it sure is scary to mention that of those 10 buds, the average THC is 10%.
There was a 492% increase in the proportion of teen treatment admissions with a medical diagnosis for marijuana abuse or dependence, compared with a 54% decline for all other substances of abuse. There was a 188% increase in the proportion of teen treatment admissions for marijuana as the primary drug of abuse, compared with a 54% decline for all other substances of abuse.
Here's another interesting statistic from 1992 to 2006. There was a 142% increase in the number of people arrested for marijuana, from 342,314 in 1992 to 829,625 in 2006. Now, the first drug courts began in 1989, and by 1992, there were 10 drug courts. Now, there are 1,699 drug courts and 539 juvenile drug courts in existence, so that's a whopping 22,380% increase in drug courts from 1992. So, more people are smoking, and there are more courts that primarily sentence marijuana smokers to drug treatment. And what do you know? Teen treatment admissions for marijuana have gone up. Well, it's quite obvious that the admissions rise because of the sentencing, not because of a need for treatment, especially when the government admits that 1/3 of all treatment admissions for marijuana haven't smoked pot in over a month, and that 58% of the people in drug treatment for marijuana were referred there by the criminal justice system.
From 1995 to 2002, there was a 136% increase in the proportion of emergency department findings of marijuana as a major substance of abuse among teens, more than 5 times the increase in such findings for all other substances of abuse.
Well, again, more people smoking pot means more mentions of it in the emergency room. These dawn statistics don't indicate causality, that the pot caused the emergency, merely that the person in the ER is an admitted or discovered pot user.
Joseph A. Califano Jr., CASA's chairman and president and former U.S. Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, said, quote, "The message for teens is clear. Today's pernicious pot is not your father's pot. The THC potency in marijuana seized in the 1970s, when marijuana use was most prevalent, was less than 1%. Today, such potency levels have climbed to 8.8%.
Please, dear Stashers, I am but 40 years old. I first smoked marijuana on July 4th, 1990. Will somebody from the baby boom generation please contact me and tell me all about this less than 1% THC pot you guys were smoking back in the day? Because from what I've read, less than 1% THC is impossible to get high from, gives you a massive headache, and in most countries is considered industrial hemp.
Califano continued, quote, "This increased potency parallels the increases we see in teen medical diagnoses, treatment admissions, and emergencies. Parents and teachers, coaches and clergy, all who work with teens must understand that marijuana is a risky and addictive drug with serious health and social consequences. The good news is that in recent years, teen marijuana use has declined. The bad news is that 10.7 million teens still report that they have used marijuana. The worst news is that teens who use the drug are playing a dangerous game of Russian roulette with the bullets of addiction, accidents, crime, and mental illness in the chamber. With all the evidence now available, simple prudence requires parents to prevent their children from using marijuana. Those parents who fail to do so are uninformed or irresponsible or both." End quote.
Look, we're glad that teenage marijuana use has declined too. Like alcohol, kids should wait until adulthood to use it, because the developing adolescent brain is coping with fluctuating hormones, new social experiences, difficult life choices, emerging personality, a flood of education, and the rigors of adjusting to the adult world with adult consequences. They don't need the added debilitating pressure of dealing with an intoxicant on top of all of that. You've got to be living firmly in reality to safely alter it. But scaring kids with pseudoscience and outright lies about cannabis gives them no better reason not to try it, and enticement to try it when they eventually see through the lies.
Hello, I'm Paul Stanford from the Hemp and Cannabis Foundation, or THCF. Medical marijuana is legal in 12 states today, and THCF has medical clinics in 6 of those states. Our physicians help qualified patients obtain an authorization for medical marijuana in their state. Patients are eligible for medical marijuana with a history of either severe chronic pain and or nausea, cancer, AIDS or HIV, hepatitis, glaucoma, seizure disorders like epilepsy, chronic muscle spasms as in multiple sclerosis or asthma, neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, and gastrointestinal disorders like IBS or Crohn's disease. If you or someone you know has one of these conditions, our doctors will help them obtain a permit for medical marijuana. THCF Medical Clinics has offices in Washington State, Oregon, Colorado, Nevada, Hawaii, and California. Call 1-800-723-0188 or go to the web at www.hemp.org or 1-800-723-0188.
This is part one of the presentation by John Wesley Hall, the president-elect of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, at the Aspen Legal Conference on June 7th, 2008. Part two follows after our musical break. This presentation is on roadside stops and search and seizure law.
Permitting these routine stops escalated to searches of a car. The reason why this is so important to us is that it's generally conceded now that the bulk of all search and seizure cases involve cars. I estimate there's 5 to 10 a day, 5 days a week. I get them off of Lexus, and the bulk of them deal with reasonable suspicion or probable cause, but the rest involve a traffic stop, at least something more. Whether it's all in the cop's mind or not is another matter. Wayne LaFave said it now believes the largest single area search and seizure law, and I have to agree with him. The significant number, by the way, the video led to suppression of the stop because the video literally put the lie on the cop. The court will say, I saw the video, it doesn't support what the officer said, or the officer said something on the video that indicates that the motorist wasn't free to leave after all, that the cop was going to keep fishing for consent until he got it, those kind of things. And if you're lucky, you can make more mileage out of that video. I haven't been so lucky except a couple of times the videos actually proved the case. And in Arkansas, the Arkansas State Police have videos of about 75% of the cars. They've been planning to have it in 100%, and you always question, I do at least, on cross-examination or examination in a suppression hearing. The government has the burden to go forward. I examine cops usually in a cross. Why they don't have a video in their car when everybody else does? Is it convenient that you don't have one, but you're doing essentially drug interdiction? And this is an aside, it's not even in my materials. There's one place in Arkansas where all the stops are now concentrated. They used to be over on the Oklahoma border in Crawford County, which is the first county across the state line. And there was a construction area there forever. Arkansas floated a $3 billion bond issue, rebuilt the entire interstate system. And at one time on the Highway Department's website, there were at least 19 construction areas between Fort Smith and West Memphis. And all of those were at least 4 to 8 miles long. Traffic would slow down considerably. 2 miles before the beginning, it would say, merge now, and they would use that as an excuse. They'd lay in wait. You didn't merge right away, they'd stop you. That was their traffic offense. And then they'd look for an out-of-state plate. They would admit that. But as long as it was justified by a traffic offense under Wren, that's a justified stop. And the question then becomes, what did they do to escalate the situation? Now all the stops occur in Hope County, Arkansas. The newspaper there is Courier Review. You go online and you run the names of the cops, and they admit in the newspaper articles that they look for out-of-state plates. I mean, it's great cross-examination material because the locals feed into that. They want to know about all this. The cops give them whatever it is they want for the local press, and then they don't realize that's going to come back to haunt them when a criminal defense lawyer can get it off the internet and just cross-examine them about it. This is Wayne LaFave's article. It's in the materials without footnotes. I put it in without footnotes so you couldn't claim that it wasn't fair use. But you just type that into Westlaw or Lexis. You can't get this anywhere online for free. I checked everywhere. But just type in that citation, it'll come right up. And it's pretty long. It's about 400 footnotes. This is his discussion. Sorry. Both in urban areas and on the interstate, police are on the watch for suspicious travelers. And when a modicum of supposedly suspicious circumstances are observed, or perhaps even a hunch or pursuant to such arbitrary considerations as the color of the driver's skin, it's only a matter of time before the technical and trivial offenses produces a necessary excuse for a traffic stop. And literally, the courts will admit anybody will commit a violation sooner or later. And I think even in Lefebvre's article somewhere, it's either Lefebvre or Macklin's article, and Macklin's article is also cited in here. And you can get that for free off of the NACDL website. Just go to Champion Magazine on the NACDL website. You don't even have to be a member to get it. Just type in Macklin as a search, and then his articles will come up and you click on it. But one of those mentioned that in 1986, Rehnquist was stopped for a traffic offense at one time. And of course, he probably wasn't searched, but he certainly has a suspicious demeanor about him, particularly when he's stoned on his painkillers. Perhaps because the offenses are so often so insignificant, the driver may be told at the outset he's merely given a warning, and most of these cases involve warnings, I've noticed. But then things get ugly. There's the hit part down at the bottom about the dog. As a part of the routine of criminal history, an outstanding warrants record check is run on the driver and the passengers, closely questioned about their identities, the reason for their travels, their intended destinations. Get them out of the car and ask them different questions, or ask them questions, and then compare the answers. We've all heard that for the last 25 years. And the like, and maybe they may be quizzed about whether they have drugs on their person or in the vehicle. The driver may be induced to submit to a full search of the vehicle. Or a drug-sniffing dog, the dog may appear on the scene and do his thing. Well, this was written just a couple of years ago, and he says, do his thing. We haven't heard that since the 70s. And I figure Lefebvre is 60 or 76 years old when he graduated from college, which is 1957. Keep in mind Kerry versus Ohio, because that, to me, is the key to it. Kerry, by the way, is 40 years old on Tuesday, June 10th, 1968. And this is the touchstone of every reasonable suspicion case there is. And this key phrase must be strictly tied to and justified by the circumstances that rendered its initiation permissible. Now, ironically, the Supreme Court has never said that a traffic stop is governed by Terry. It's applied it dicta in Berkmer versus McCarty that said Miranda doesn't apply to a traffic stop because it's an investigative detention. But it's based on the probable cause for the traffic offense. Or swerving on the road, maybe reasonable suspicion. If you cross the fog line, that's a violation of the law, but they don't give you warnings. They pull you over to see if you're impaired or you're falling asleep. That's the usual justification for that stop.
If I were to tell you that in America, right now, over 1 million children sell marijuana, what would you think? Would you think that any public policy that creates over 1 million teenage marijuana dealers needs to be re-examined and possibly amended? You would not be alone. The members of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, aka NORML, have been working since 1970 to reform marijuana laws such that responsible adults, not children, sell and use marijuana. Isn't it high time to reform America's misguided marijuana laws? This is Alan St. Pierre, Executive Director of NORML in Washington, D.C. Only concerned citizens can effectively end the federal government's nearly 70-year-old prohibition on responsible adult marijuana sales and use. Want to know more about how you can help? Contact us at NORML, toll-free, 888-67-NORML, or by visiting the organization's popular and informative webpage at NORML, NORML.org.
Here at the NORML Daily Audio Stash, we work hard to change our nation's marijuana laws through education and discussion. But we also take time to relax and unwind with an eclectic mix of pod-safe music from many independent artists. We look for music that speaks to the growing truth about cannabis, or music that speaks to broader themes of freedom, liberty, social justice, equality, and protest. To find out more about the artists and download the music you hear on this podcast, just log on to stash.normal.org. And if you'd like to get your music heard by the online cannabis community, just send us an email at stash@normal.org. On today's Musical Stash, we go global with Japanese rapper Hannabis from Okayama City, which is the hotspot in Japan for underground hip-hop and the cannabis community. Today's track was sent to the stash by Gomyo, a Shingon Buddhist priest from Michigan living in Japan for the past 14 years, who joins Hannabis on today's track, On the Road Home. Gomyo has been investigating the idea that Shingon priests may have used cannabis in rituals prior to occupation, during and after World War II. Gomyo has also formed a group of monks who promote street Buddhism, incorporating street culture such as hip-hop into the modern Buddhist practice. His group is called Hoodie Monks. This collaborative track comes from the Hannabis' first solo album, Just Time 420, and features not only our friend Gomyo, but Hoodie Monk member DJ Akubi, which means yawn in Japanese, and DJ Kazushit. This track is recorded in English, Japanese, and kick-ass groove. Explore the world of Japanese rap. You'll love what you hear. Konnichiwa. For more of Hannabis, check out his MySpace page, and for more on our friend Gomyo and his group, the Hoodie Monks, visit hoodiemonks.org. You can get the MySpace information from our blog at stash.normal.org, where you'll also find a download for the MP3 of this track. It's On the Road Home with Hannabis.
Homegrown, high-grade, high-life, Hannabis on the throne. On the road home, rolling with a homegrown, high-grade, high-life, Hannabis on the throne. On the road home, on the road home, down on the road home, die. On the road get high, on the road home, fly. On the road home, down on the road home, die. まるでダイヤモンドのように今日も一層輝いてるクリスタル量もほどほどに程よく濃くしてどうもお疲れ様明日また一人来るまでオンザロードホームさっき巻いたやつともう一本の方危険想像以上の飛びに SOS で Just Time 表にレイOn the road home, on the road is home. When your home is the road, then you're always on the road home. On the roam, on the road is Shikoku. A hen roast and Datsu, no house to go home to. A hoodie monk for life, just like I told you. Was etched in my skin by my main man, old new ink. What you think? Always stink of pink fumes, blunt smoke and pink. 夜明けのスモーク、イケイケのジープ。マックの駐車場で煙ドリンク What you think? 危ねハンドリング朝から沸騰するアドレナリン半ば強引にあげるこのざま葉巻の中身で満帆な灰皿ブランド一本炊いててんだら寝るまでずっと上がっていてんだわ On the road home rolling with a homegrown high grade high life Hannabis on the throne On the road home rolling with a homegrown high grade high life Hannabis on the throne On the road home rolling with a homegrown high grade high life Hannabis on the throne On the road home rolling with a homegrown high grade high life Hannabis on the throne On the road home とある駅のホーム赤く染まった目隠すように深くかぶったキャップまるで鉄板のように圧縮されラップに巻かれて匂いを阻むすべ我慢できずトイレです癖グリーン車悲壮のこと解放してくれ四国でウォーキング変動とトーキングセンスのマーキングいつもスパーキング The bong, light it up all day long Fast pace going strong, Cheech and Chong Sing along as we spark the bong It's called the Gomo and it starts with a gong 寺の鐘が鳴る生きていりゃ歯がまへる静けさが回す道草く何度も目にした風景のループ生きてきた街が俺たちのルーツ寺の鐘が鳴る生きていりゃ歯がまへる静けさが回す道草く何度も目にした風景のループ生きてきた街が俺たちのルーツ Get high on the road home on the road home down on the road home down
76% of Americans no longer support arresting and jailing marijuana smokers, and nearly as many support the medical patients having access to medical marijuana. And over 80% of our citizens now believe the war on drugs is an ineffective failure. So the question is, when will the government's misguided war on adult marijuana smokers finally end? When? Simple. When you and your like-minded friends, family, and coworkers get involved with an organization such as the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, also known as NORML. My name is Keith Stropp, and I founded the organization in 1970. Contact us at NORML, toll-free, 888-67-NORML, or by visiting the organization's up-to-date webpage at www.norml.org.
And now part 2 of John Wesley Hall's presentation on roadside traffic stops and search and seizure.
So here's the bad law. Holding that any questions that do not prolong the stop are valid under Mueller versus Mena. This is just a few of the cases, this isn't all of them. The Ninth Circuit, this case named Mendez, where cert was denied. 10th Circuit Stewart. Georgia in the Celeron versus State, 2006. And some recent examples, a case from just a week ago, a traffic stop that led to immediate drug dog sniff, did not extend the stop, therefore was valid. So you got cops that are carrying dogs around with them in the car. Can they do a dog sniff while they radio in, they have somebody check on the computer? And also, just thought of this, a lot of cops these days have their own computer terminal in the car. They can run it themselves. They don't have to go to dispatch. So they got a computer terminal in the car, they can run it, get the answer back almost immediately. So if they can run it and get it back immediately, what if they do the dog sniff first? They've extended the stop. They've tried to facilitate the use of computers to do the quick check, get it over with, and get the cop back on the road. That's important too. Without having him sit or wait around for 5 minutes while they use an old outdated computer system to run the NCIC check, and whether or not there's wants or warrants, whether or not the driver's license is valid under the state law. The good law, recognizing reality. We all know the reality is that motorists stopped on the side of the road are vulnerable, subject to coercion just by asking questions. And even if the officer says a person is free to leave, as long as the cop is standing there, is the person really free to leave? Because our social conventions are the person is not. They're supposed to stand there and be a good citizen, like you heard Jerry said talk yesterday about that confession is good for the soul and all that bullshit. You're not free to ignore questions from a cop. That's our social convention. If the cop's asking you a question, you're supposed to pay attention to the good officer and at least find out what he's asking. Remember, Terry says, in the case law afterward, there's no problem with addressing questions to somebody. The stop is otherwise valid. And I love the infamous Lieutenant Colombo gambit, which has been recognized in plenty of cases over the last 15 years. One more thing, if you don't mind, and you see a lot in Kansas. Apparently they were trained for this in Kansas, because I remember reading at least a half dozen cases before State versus Johnson. But it's now recognized as unlawfully continuing to stop. This case is in the materials, I believe, and that case is only about, it's from late 2006, so it's a little over 18 months old. Because, remember, Colombo said, well, my superiors, they need to know one more thing. It's not me, it's somebody else needs to know this. I'm just the carrier of the message. So don't take offense at this, I just have to add it. Where the district court has expressly found that there was no engagement by the officer between return of the documentation, additional questioning, the undetectability of any transition to a consensual encounter. Remember, I was talking about, I know when I see it, you just can't really tell. The facts in every case could be exactly the same, and courts could look at them differently. Depends on your state and how you argue the case, you'll see. The undetectability of any transition to a consensual encounter weighs heavily against the objective conclusion the driver should believe that he or she was free to go. And that's the question. What does the person objectively believe? Which is why the video can be really important. end the conversation and simply drive away, which is a touchstone of the proper analysis. Continued activation of the emergency lights is a factor to be considered in the totality of the circumstances. This is my assessment of the cases. I haven't seen this listed as a laundry list anywhere that I recall. Motorists were stopped with the blue lights and they remained on. Of course, they remain on for a safety purpose. But while they're on for a safety purpose, anybody who's ever seen the videos of a nighttime stop are going to pull over themselves at night. The light is blinding for a reason, is to disorient the person they pulled over. The cops will admit that. It's in their training. That's why they have all these bright takedown lights. They can't say it was purely for safety. Just look at the video of any stop at night. The officer remains outside the patrol car, standing there talking to you. It says you're free to go, but stands there. Now, any normal person would say, why the hell is he still standing? Can I just drive off? And if you do drive off, what happens then? Is the officer still talking, trying to engage the motorists or passengers? And again, what is our social convention? This is part of the underlying basis of the expectation of privacy. What does society expect? What's reasonable? This is the undercurrent of the entire body of the law of expectation of privacy since 1963. They continue talking with the officer, drive off risking arrest. I've actually asked this, and I hate to do it because it's one of those don't ask a question when you don't know the answer, but sometimes it doesn't hurt to ask anyway. And I've had cops say I would have arrested him. Great, so he wasn't free to go, was he? No, he wasn't. In my mind, he was not free to go. If he drove off, I was going to stop him again, or I'd chase after him and get him for fleeing. They expect, society expects, and the courts expect people to stay put until it's done. Courts expect. So put that back on the court. If the court expects people to stay there, how can you say that he's not free to go? Or that you couldn't believe he was free to go? Or whatever. Did the motorist explicitly, the officer explicitly say to the motorist he's free to leave? Does the videotape back it up? Usually they don't say they're free to leave. Sometimes they do. You're free to go, but I need to ask you another question. You're free to go, but is not free to go. Look for them. They'll say it that way. And remember, the burden of proof is always on the government, holding to that burden of proof. A lot of courts, and within the last 3 or 4 weeks, I recall at least 3 or 4 courts holding that the stop became invalid because the officer just said the wrong words and extended the stop. Therefore, to me, the key is getting the court to accept these realities as a part of normal police-citizen contact. And to say that the motorist is free to go and the cop is standing there is pure fiction. And some courts will agree with that.
Thank you for downloading the NORML Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. We are produced by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C. Our executive producer is Alan St. Pierre. Our deputy director is Paul Armentano. Our webmaster is Brian Judy. And web production is provided by Red Aphid Interactive Media. As always, you can catch up on the latest information about marijuana at www.norml.org. And you can interact and download from our Audio Stash blog at stash.norml.org. For everyone here at NORML, I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville, hoping all your harvests are bountiful and your encounters with law enforcement are non-existent. We leave you today with another one of our cannabis quotes, this one from Glenwood Smith, the musician, who says, quote, "Hemp is not illegal because of marijuana. Marijuana is illegal because of hemp. In the same sense, marijuana is not illegal because it is dangerous. Marijuana is dangerous because it is illegal." End quote. That's a perfect way to put it. You know, all the industrial uses of hemp are probably the reason that nobody wants to see it legalized, at least the industries that would have to compete with it. We'll see you tomorrow on The Stash, and we hope you tune in because we got a great interview with director Jonathan Levine, who's the director of the new movie The Whackness, a great film starring Sir Ben Kingsley, Oh, it's coming out in July. You'll really like the movie, and the interview with Jonathan comes up on tomorrow's Stash. Also, the return of Steve Bloom from celebstoner.com. Not that he was missing. It's really my fault because I was out on the road the last few weekends. So until next time, take care of each other, tokers.